We have Craig Zingerline, founder and CEO of Growth University, joining us. Hi, Craig. How's it going today?
It's going great. Can you hear me okay?
Doing well. Thanks for joining us, taking time out of your day.
Of course. Yeah. Happy to be here. And excited to dig in on some growth stuff. So the last speaker was fantastic. I just actually followed a bunch of the speakers on Twitter and LinkedIn. So thanks for putting together a great event.
Cool. Well, we appreciate y'all joining us. So you are about to kick off on probably one of my favorite growth topics, early customer acquisition experiments. Um, I like to think of us growth leaders or growth marketers as kind of mad scientists because we're
Yes.
constantly experimenting with different tactics and strategies. So, Craig, I won't take up any more of your mic time. I will kind of check in with 5 minutes left for like Q&A, or if you want to leave a little bit longer than that.
Sounds
But if you
great.
want to introduce yourself and kind of take over the conversation, thanks for joining us.
Sounds good. Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to share my screen and let's see how that shows up. Can you see my screen all right? Looks like we probably can. Um, I don't think I can full screen it in presentation, but as everybody can hear me, okay, I'm good to go. Yeah, so I'm here to talk about early customer acquisition and specifically a lot around experimentation. And I've got a couple other windows open here that I'll walk through as we go today. Just a little bit about me. I'm a six-time founder, current CEO and founder of Velocity Growth. We were formerly known as Growth University. I've had a whole bunch of fun times in my career across a lot of different companies. I've had executive roles at Sandbox, Upside Travel, Red Tricycle, Votion, New Signature, among others. I also do a little bit of investing and advisory work. And I had interviewed over 200 founders over the past 4 years to really try to understand what separates the startups that make it from the startups that don't. And there's some pretty crazy stats out there. I'll spare you of all the details, but the number is something like 92% of startups will never make it to that 10-year mark, which is a long, that's 8% success over 10 years is, you could argue it's not terrible, but what happens to the other 92%? And as an operator and as somebody who's been exposed to so many different startups, and I've had a few wins as well, and some epic failures, I really set out on this mission to try to put together a formula. It started as a passion project and it's turned into a whole company on what are the ways that you can actually increase the velocity of the growth of your business, whether you're an SMB or mid-market company or a startup or a tech startup. I try to apply what I call a holistic model of growth into growing the business. So I'm going to get started here, but basically when we look at failure, most startups fail. It's simple. They fail because they don't find customers fast enough or quick enough, and they don't build enough value for those customers to stick around long term. And you may argue that there's a million other things, but it really boils down to this, right? Like you'll be in business if you have the ability to find customers and keep those customers around. Now, that's not to say things like the market. I mean, we've headed into a crazy market here. Currently, we just came out of a multi-year blitz from my perspective, having survived two prior downturns. I mean, the market was really frothy for a long time. And now we're back to some level set. So you could argue that market is a factor in all of this, as well as luck and hard work and all that. But really, it comes down to getting in front of customers, frankly. In my 20 plus years of experience with startups has taught me to just obsess over finding customers that are willing to pay for your product. A lot of us get started with hopes and dreams in terms of what we're building. And we read all these stories and we get inspired and we've got this big product vision. All that is great. But what you need to figure out is, are there people on planet Earth willing to spend time with your brand and spend money with you? And if you can do that, you can do that over and over again, you're on your way. There's a whole bunch of misconceptions as I did all this customer discovery and kind of self-analyzed my time within multiple different startups. Anything from companies that have been bootstrapped to I was at one company that raised $150 million and everything in between. service companies and agencies, as well as tech startups, product first companies, non-product companies. We hear all these things, right? And here's what we're led to believe. Like, you're going to just go your first customers in a single channel. It might be offline or online. This is pulled from Lenny's newsletter, which is an absolutely incredible source. I'm a subscriber. But the thing that I like to point out for your really early customer discovery is look at the logos here. Most of these are 5, 10, 15 years old. So they're not even that modern. We don't know what these companies would have been doing today to grow. And these are also the companies that made it long term to a level of scale that most of us will never see. And these are all name brands. The vast majority of companies never get to this point. So take what you see out there from these big companies with a grain of salt, because what worked for them, even very early on, may or may not work for you. But you also want to be open and objective, understanding and learning from these types of resources around what may work for your startup. We're told things like focus on a single channel, don't focus on a single channel, go deep, spend money, don't spend money, go wide, launch early, launch when things look great. And we hear things like this: don't do ads, SEO is amazing, or product-led growth all the way. You don't need to do marketing, or I didn't do marketing, or Apple doesn't do marketing, or Tesla doesn't do marketing. That's just generally really bad advice. You may hear build in stealth and just do a big launch, or do what Clubhouse did, build FOMO. You may hear that email won't work, it's dead. You may hear hire an agency or build the team. All of these things are just swirling when we're out there in the market. And as founders, we're just trying to find our way. And these are the things that we're hearing. And then here's what we think. We think, well, my idea is incredible, so it's not going to be as hard as everybody says it's going to be. Or my product is great and therefore people are going to use it. Or I'm pretty good at a particular marketing channel and I'll just figure this out. Or I don't need to launch yet. I'm going to get PR. I'm going to hit this on Product Hunt. Things are just going to go from there. And I'm going to just listen to what everybody else says. And then we see the result of that. These are actual screenshots from different advertisements and other things that I've been on the receiving end of. I mean, the one-to-one outreach it couldn't be worse. Like, I could not try to build something worse than some of the stuff that I see from people that, from what I can tell, are earnestly trying to grow their companies. Right. And so just don't do this stuff, right? Like, there is a process that we can follow. Now, conversely, the Miros of the world and the Cartas and the Ramps of the world, they're doing a pretty good job. But 99% of the stuff that you see that's one-to-one and coming in via, spammy channels, it just doesn't work. But here's the reality. Almost nobody knows what will work or what will not work, especially early on. I mean, when I look at a new startup and somebody who has just brought a product to market, or hopefully they've already started marketing before they brought the product to market, and they just hand it over, they're like, what would you do? I don't know. I'm not sure what you're supposed to do, but I have a framework that you can follow that will walk you through the steps to hopefully prove out some of the things that you need to do. And this is where experimentation comes in. And I want to set the mindset that experimentation is a long game. This is not a scenario where you simply put something out into the wild and your feedback loops are instantaneous. You just don't have that luxury when you're small. So you're going to need to experiment a lot and grind it out for a while. And over time, you'll figure things out. But the reality is that to find customers, you need a problem that's big enough that somebody's going to pay for a solution for. And so if you have a job and you're running a side hustle and you're making a little bit of money on the side hustle, be really careful before you quit that job to go all in on your startup. Make sure that you've got a market and a problem that's big enough that you have a total addressable market that will support you in terms of what you need as a person, or potentially as a partner, or somebody who has kids, right? To support the needs of yourself, and your family, and potentially your team. So I always like to throw a little bit of caution in. I'm all about entrepreneurship. I've taken the plunge many, many times. But also I've probably taken on a little bit too too much risk at certain points in my career, and it gets really stressful. Once you have that kind of market and you've started to prove out that you can get customers to pay, then you need to get your product in front of users or buyers. And this is really where the magic happens. And so when I talk about customer acquisition, I like to start with this 4-step process. And step 1 is understanding the value that your product delivers or brings to this ideal set of paying users. Number 2, you have to understand what their intent is so that you can understand where these people hang out. Step 3 is you need to experiment and get in front of these customers or users. And then it's a whole bunch of iterations and repetition. Companies that are at scale, startups that you see and you read about, they're doing the same thing over and over and over and over again. They're simply in repeat mode because they've probably exhausted many of the things that you'll need to start with. Just a little bit about my company, just so you can what we do in terms of the value that my product delivers. I run Velocity Growth, and we have 15 on-demand training programs. We also run live cohorts for growth and marketing. And we've put thousands of founders through our courses and programs at this point in time. So there's training, there's experimentation models. We've got a whole bunch of tools that we've built. And we also run an in-house growth agency to do more hands-on work. So when we think about understanding the value that your product delivers, really before you can find customers, you have to understand that. So start now. If you don't have a clear value prop or you can't clearly articulate it, start thinking about that value prop now. Now, easier said than done, right? We often start with a value prop for a potential buyer that we just get wrong. And I do this, pretty consistently when starting companies. We have a guess on who our persona is, and we're often wrong with the assumptions that we make about the value that our product or solution or service brings to the market. But you also need to start somewhere. The next step is, once you start to understand that value, okay, well, what is the intentionality of the user that you're going after? Are you in a market where the user understands and has a problem that they know exists and that they're looking for? And if you do, then it's likely that your user is going to go out and search for the solution to that problem that they might have. So if your car breaks down, you're going to look for local mechanics. If you have a friend who bought a really cool product and you're interested in that product, you may go search for it. So in those cases, branded search, search and optimization, search engine marketing are really the channels that you're likely going to start with, because there's a problem solution fit already. Somebody's searching with some level of intent for what you offer. And then you need to get them to the website and get them to purchase or engage and get them on your email list and try to move them along the buyer journey. But if your user is not aware that a problem exists, then you have to point out that problem. You have to build awareness. And that's what paid social or content marketing, organic social, influencer marketing, all those things are really great at. So that's how I think about that level of customer intent. And then, of course, you need to kind of move them through the activation and buyer journey. So I think this focus on intentionality, though, often gets thrown overboard because we inherently think about, well, I have this value prop. I think I know who my buyer is. I just want to go work in some channel. But I see this over and over again where I'll talk to a founder and they'll be like, yeah, the person searching for the problem, and it turns out they're not. But the founder had just guessed that the person's searching, but they don't have any data or research on it. One of the fastest ways to prove this out is to actually spend a little bit of money in paid acquisition channels. It'll tell you really quickly if there's search intent or click intent or not. Whereas with SEO, you may say, well, I'm going to only do SEO because SEO is free. Well, SEO is probably going to take you 3 months to 6 months to get any kind of read on. So there's this balance of time versus money. How do you actually know? How do you know the intent of your audience? Well, you have to talk to customers, right? So if you're spending money, you'll learn this relatively quickly, right? You can buy some ads, you can spin up landing pages, you can drive some traffic and you'll know what the intent is. But really, you got to look at customer discovery. You need to talk to other humans who you think are the buyer. And then you can look at where they purchase. And then you can run experiments in different channels to find them. And once you do all that, then you can get in front of those customers, right? Only then can you get in front of those customers. And what you want to ask for here is, does your product or service, what does it solve for that user? What problem does it solve for them? What do they gain by using your product or service? Or what do they lose by not using it or buying it, right? What is their experience? And often it comes down to user psychology. Does this save them time or money? Does it make them more productive? Does it make them look or feel better? Does it handle some sort of utility for them or their company? Does it save them time, energy, or does it entertain them, right? You take any of those big startups that we saw the logos for earlier, and they generally fit within one or two of these core themes, right? These startups have understood what the user wants and needs, and they build their whole model around servicing that. Now, the other thing, especially as you move into B2B, is the user the buyer, or are they buying for somebody else? Who else is involved in the deal? Do they need sign off? And this becomes a really critical piece as you start to move, especially in your B2B space, as you move through customer acquisition and growth. So where I start with this, and we're going to start to get really, really tactical here, and I've got 3 growth experiments to walk you through. I start with a user hypothesis template. And here's how it goes. I write this for all of the different personas in all the companies that I work with. So I believe that some role wants to improve something. Therefore, if I provide something of value, helping them do that, I impact something, right? So basically fill in the blanks, what's in brackets here, and build your user hypothesis. And what this formula forces you to do is think about that value solution from the perspective of the user. Now, again, we may think that we know what the true problem our product solves for the user, but we may not know. And we also might have multiple personas. So you're likely going to go through multiple iterations of this type of templating where you're putting something out into the wild, putting some messaging into the wild, and you're getting feedback from those people in terms of how that's resonating. Or it'll just show up in your numbers, right? If you're getting no conversions and nobody cares about what you're doing, you may have a mismatch between your message and the value that you're bringing with that message and the audience. So when we think about initial target audience or ideal customer profiles, who is that initial customer you can target? My own example with Growth University, now Velocity Growth, I knew that founders had challenges with growth. How did I know that? I didn't make this stuff up, right? I talked to 200 plus. Longer term, I talked to 400, right? But in my first year of doing discovery, I was taking calls in my car, commuting to my full-time job at the time. I was doing this nights and weekends, early mornings, sitting in traffic on the call. And I was literally like on calls, and I would record myself and my answers, and I would transcribe that into content. And I still started to build a playbook, and I categorized the content based on questions that I was hearing and the challenges that founders were having, eventually built it into curriculum. Right. And I also applied my own frustrations and struggles with both success and failure as an operator into the mix. So that's what I did. I went out and talked to hundreds of founders. I didn't want to just make this stuff up and try to build a business off of something that I didn't know was viable. So you want to research the types of roles and the types of companies that your ideal customer profile works at, right? Or runs. And Sales Navigator and LinkedIn and Apollo AI, some of these tools that I'll show you in a little bit are fantastic for that. So here's my narrative. I believe that every early stage startup founder wants to improve their startup growth, including increased user acquisition and or revenue. That's what founders told me they want to do. 100% of founders I've talked to want to grow their startup. 0% don't want to grow their startup. Therefore, if I provide a product or service helping them do that, I make them better at their job. Now, I didn't define what the product or service is yet, but early on, this is literally what I used to understand, am I on the right track or am I not? And if I started to hear that, you know what, founders don't really care about growing their startup, then I'm really glad I didn't build a bunch of products and spend a bunch of time on it. So I proved the model out before I even had anything to sell. So I talk about this validation and conversion. So it's not enough just to like have this success criteria. Like, how does your persona measure success and can you help them? You also have to make sure that your persona has the problem that you solve for, right? And do they have a current solution or not? And then eventually, how do you convert them? And I call those conversion points. How do you go from conversation to close? That's the mindset we're looking at. So remember your original questions. We're going to validate these. Does your product save the person time or money? Does it make them look or feel better, right? Does it handle some sort of utility? You're going to use those types of user psychology questions as you go and build out your profiles and as you go to market. And then, does your persona have this problem? Yes or no? Talk to the user. Don't try to sell them anything yet. Figure out first the thing that I built. If you've got a piece of technology that you built and you're wondering why the hell you can't sell it, chances are you probably skipped this step. So go back to first principles and basics. Like, what are you doing and why? And who is the human that has the problem that you've got the solution for? And if you can't figure that out, then you need to go back and adjust your ideal customer profile. Ideally, though, you are starting to have conversations with people that have this problem, and your product or service can help them be a better version of themselves. Okay. So to do this, and in order to actually start driving some leads, so getting a little bit more tactical, you have to understand where, in my case, founders hang out. So I did this whole mapping exercise, and you can do the same exact thing. It's a scorecard. I call it the founder channel scorecard. But if you're selling into CFOs, it's a CFO channel scorecard. What's the channel? What's the targeting capability? What lessons have you learned based on the experimentation you've run in these channels? So I'll walk you through a couple examples here. This is all based on real stuff that I've done. Search. Early on, I thought that SEO would be a great way for me to build this business. And it turns out that some founders look for help for growth training, but many aren't, they're not really looking for it. And the other thing that I found is that agencies and marketplaces spend a boatload of money on keywords that are the same types of things that the founders that I would be trying to target on SEM or SEO would look for. And I also learned, so that would cost a lot of money. And I also learned that SEO takes a lot of time. So it's not that I'm not doing search. I am doing search, and we do a lot of search, especially for our clients. We do a ton of search, but it's just not the primary channel for velocity growth, because we found other channels that work a lot better. So partnerships, next row down. Targeting is more of land and expand. Well, what is this? I looked for places that were adjacent to my company where founders hung out. Growth Mentor and Growth Match came to mind. Do I have to pay to play, or do I just go in and add value? I'll walk you through an experiment with this. But the point here, the takeaway is that you want to map the channel to the targeting, and then you want to start to learn lessons through experiments that you're running. So here's the first way to start to understand this stuff. Experiment one is LinkedIn audience building and customer discovery. So my hypothesis, I'm just going to say straight up, some of the examples that I showed you in terms of how people are trying to get me to buy their stuff is coming from LinkedIn, and it's the worst stuff I've ever seen in my entire life from a marketing or sales perspective. So I'm going to caveat this by saying LinkedIn is not your place to do your cheesy sales pitch. Don't do that. It's your place to learn. So here's one hypothesis. I can directly find founders who want to talk to me about their pain points around growth for their startup. And from these conversations, I can soft sell them into my solution. I don't have a baseline yet. Baseline or control. When you're building an experiment, your baseline is what have you done before that you can apply metrics against. You don't have anything because you haven't done anything yet. What's my setup here? Okay, I'm going to look for 100 to 200 founders as first degree connections over the next month or two. So what I want to do is I want to add new connections on LinkedIn, and I'm going to run a couple experiments here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to script some outreach. So, hi, Craig, I saw you're a founder. I just founded Velocity Growth, and I was hoping to pick your brain on what rookie mistakes I should try to avoid as I grow. Would you be willing to have a quick mentor call with me? Now, when I sent this out and got replies and get on the phone with people, I am legitimately asking them questions. I am not selling them. And that's the key differentiator between how most people are using LinkedIn and why it's getting a reputation for spam and those who are using it for discovery. Okay. So how do I actually start the process? Well, I can simply go to LinkedIn, search, Hopefully this works. Yep. I just searched for founder, and it's going to pull up initially my second degree connections or my third degree connections. And I can see that there's somewhere around 7 million results. And what I can start to do is I can start to connect with people, and I can take my note and I could drop it in here and I could say send. And now I've connected with Carlisle or whomever else is in this mix. And I now, for some of them who accept my connection request, have both requested an intro and I've asked for help, right? I've asked if they'd be willing to mentor me. Okay. I mentor people all the time. Other people will be willing to mentor you. If you've got Sales Navigator, it makes it a lot easier. So I did a search here. There's 64,000 people in the United States that are second degree connections of mine that are in North America, companies of 11 to 50 with the job title founder. 64,000. So when you say like you don't know where to find leads, well, I think Sales Navigator costs about $50 a month, and I can go and I can directly target using my script, and I can start to build my persona and my profile. Now, don't try to scale this yet, right? This is one-to-one, hand-to-hand outreach where you're just trying to learn. You want to establish a conversation with somebody who's willing to spend some time with you, okay? If you want to scale it, you can do that later. This is a screenshot from my Phantom Buster where you can see over the last, 6 or 7 months, I've gotten 734 connection requests that have been accepted. I've sent out 3,600. Roughly 20% of the people I reach out to accept my connection request. And all I'm doing is saying, hey, as a startup founder, I'm putting a lot of content out. I would love for you to check it out. There's no ask. There's no call to action. There's nothing salesy. This is it right here. Okay. So I'm giving away information. But here's why this experiment is important. It's giving me predictable impressions and engagement, right? The long tail of what I'm doing here means that I now have predictable impressions on post, engagements, and some reliability on clicks. So I posted this a couple of days ago on LinkedIn. I said, hey, where'd all the good people on LinkedIn go? All I'm hearing is inbound spam, right? So this was kind of a gripe, like a complaint. Almost 2,000 impressions, a whole bunch of comments, people kind of liking it. Like, it just builds the profile. And then later on, what I can do is when people become my first degree connection and I really have something that I need help with, or I want to promote something, now I can directly outreach to them because I have so many people that are in my audience. And I do that very politely and in a non-spammy way. Okay, experiment 2, part approach. Again, I thought that if I could plug into existing networks where founders hang out and I add a ton of value to their communities, this is external communities, I could build awareness and eventually convert customers. So early on in my company, I'd done a little bit of work here and I had some interest based on hanging out in other communities where I could be a growth mentor. And so I used a bunch of different platforms, and there was some conviction there. I realized I'm good at growth mentorship because I have a lot of experience, and there's multiple marketplaces where I can do this. So I started with having 10 calls, and I asked myself, will one of them become a member or a customer of what I'm doing? And it turns out, yes, they would. So then what I did was I joined the closest platform, and there's a platform called Growth Mentor that they're still very active on. And it turns out there's massive demand for my time when I offer free 15 or 30-minute calls. And there's also interest in the paid stuff that I do too. And I don't even have to sell it. So I'm just finding an adjacent company to mine. You could say maybe they're a competitor, but they're not. I'm in as the supply side of their network, and I'm having conversations, and it's leading to real business. In fact, I did 227 sessions just on this platform with a 4.99 review. And it's at the point now where in the community that we're in within Growth Mentor, where I hang out, I've done hundreds of free calls. I give a lot of startup value back to the community. I did my time for the first 1.5 or 2 years. I now have social proof. And now when people come in and they're like, hey, I need help with whatever, the founders of the platform will sometimes just say, hey, go talk to Craig, right? Because I built that level of trust within the platform. And I gave before I asked for anything. So think about giving first. And the final section here is on cold email. So I also thought, hypothesis, I can directly email founders, show my value, and then get them into conversations to talk about growth. Now, this is much more straightforward. And again, I didn't have a baseline at the time that I started this. What I decided to do with this experiment was source 250 founders to email over the next 30 days. I'm not doing bulk email. All I'm doing is sending from my HubSpot. I'm doing 10 a day, roughly for 30 days, not counting weekends. So 250 in the first month. You don't get put on any spam lists when you do this. You're not trying to send bulk, and you're doing personalized outreach. I'm not just writing one generic script. I'm taking my script here, and feel free to screenshot this if you want to. I'm taking this and I'm repositioning it based on the person that I'm doing the outreach to. And guess what happens, right? You start to get a reputation of being somebody who knows what they're doing, and to be able to build those relationships with people. And yes, it started with cold outreach, but it doesn't matter because you weren't selling anything. You were trying to provide some value back. And so the way that I look at kind of sourcing this type of experiment is through either LinkedIn Classic or Sales Navigator. There's a platform called Apollo AI that you can use and log in, and you can go and find your first 100 or 200 or 250 contacts that you want to put that value prop that we went through earlier in front of. And so that's great, right? So all of these tactics are good, but you may be saying, okay, well, Craig, what do I do? Like, this is great to have all these conversations and kind of get the feelers out there. You now need to think about conversion points. And so do you send people to a resource or a page? Do you give them additional value? Do you give away something for free? I do a lot of these mentorship calls to learn more about businesses, give them free advice. And then if they need help, they can ask me for more help and they can pay me for that, right? So you can point out these problems and you can present your solution at that point. And so again, pick 100 leads and ask yourself after 2 or 3 weeks, what did I learn? What did I learn from that outreach that I just did? But if you never get started, you're not going to learn. So take your script, customize it for every human that you try to outreach to, and then ask yourself after a week of doing that, what did I learn across all of these experiments? That's what you're trying to do. You're trying to learn. Then when you start to find stuff that's actually working, you can repeat and then iterate. So by now, let's say you run this model for 3 months. You've got some awareness on multiple channels now. You're starting to understand what you're going to need to do to iterate more quickly to lead to qualification. And then you can focus on step by step. Is my landing page good? Was my copy good? Is my pricing okay? What are these conversations and relationships that I'm building? What are they telling me about my current business? And how do I use that to become a better version of myself and apply what I'm learning from them back into the core DNA of my business? And that's it, right? There's no silver bullet. There's no waving a magical wand. You just have to put in the time and do the work and iterate. And these are quite literally the things that myself and often my team will start with when we're thinking about early customer discovery. Now, if you've got some money, paid acquisition is a great way to do it. You could basically skip those first 3 steps to learn about your messaging and ideal customer profile. But if you're like a lot of founders and you're bootstrapping and you've got some time, but less money, these 3 experiments are ways that I would think about getting your stuff out into the wild. So thank you so much. I'm out of time, but I've got tons of free content at velocity.com. And if you need any help or want to chat, reach out. Just Craig at velocitygrowth.com. Thank you so much. That's the end of my talk.
Okay, my apologies.
There you are.
Can you hear me now? Excellent.
I can hear you now.
I was going to say, excellent, Craig. I just want to say that was an excellent presentation. In fact, I think you provided a very solid business development and sales channel roadmap, to say the very least. And in fact, a lot of the things you said ringed very, very true. And in fact, especially when you mentioned those type of spam emails on LinkedIn all the time. And I think the hook that is missing is that they're so generic. It is very clear. Okay, this was a bulk mass, email, and I could think about 5 to 10 examples off the top of my head of those type of things. It almost seems like the way you're doing it, it's almost like you're really building a relationship first before you're selling something, which I think is great, because so many people just try to sell immediately.
You can't do that. I mean, and look, I learned the hard way with this stuff. I mean, like really the hard way. Like what I'm at the point now, and it depends on your price point for your product, but one-to-one partnership based slowing down to speed up has really become critical. And I think most businesses have like one, maybe two primary channels that are going to be like fast growth. And they're usually on the performance side: Google ads, Facebook, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
What's often overlooked is this longer tail, slower path. But the problem is that people try to skip this step. And I do think that, to your point on sales and marketing, I can't like overemphasize. I didn't get into like conversion tracking and pixels and CRMs and stuff, but the number one mistake I'm seeing founders make the next iteration after this stuff that we went through is that they don't know how to make sense of what they're doing. Like they can't quantify the impact of time or money. And they're often doing things the wrong way there too. So like, you got to think about this stuff holistically. You have to slow it down before you can speed it up. And then when you find that signal, then you can exploit that channel. Right. So we figured out that cold outreach worked well. And then we actually brought on an agency to do cold outreach for us, and we scaled it. But it took me doing it over and over and over again to perfect the process, so we even knew what we were talking about.
Wonderful. And do you feel that there's almost this transition going on effectively of a separation from kind of the status quo or legacy systems as to how this stuff was traditionally done? I don't think until recently I've heard of, let's say a business development or channel sales pipeline that's like build the relationship first, then sell. It seems to me a lot of companies are still using the same playbook, all around. I hear about it from my colleagues. Research. There's plenty of research on it as well, and I think there's something to be said about playing the long game and actually, building a relationship. You never know how people can open windows and open doors for you later down the line, and vice versa.
Totally true. I mean, I'll give you one quick anecdote there. So we do a lot of cold outreach. So like, we break the rules, like from what I talked about, but we're at a level of scale that we weren't at a year and a half ago. When we deal with a cold outreach potential lead or a lead, the sales process is way longer versus somebody that I know who refers somebody in. I can close that deal in like a day, right? It's just in somebody that I've built a relationship on, even if I've never met them in person necessarily, like that maybe they're reading my content or they heard me on a podcast and now they subscribe to my newsletter and they're fans of like what we're doing for community building and velocity growth. It's not a sales call. It's like, are we the right fit to help you grow or not? And if we're not the right fit, we don't want to waste anybody's time. But if we are, then let's do this. And it moves really quickly.
Well, I got to say, you were very surgical in your approach and articulation of all this. And I would certainly suggest to anybody to put this on repeat, especially in business development, sales, and marketing roles. It is a lot more human. I think the process is a lot more human than a lot of people like to think it is. So, Craig, I just want to say thank you very much for the presentation today. It was highly informative. And yes, I'm looking forward to also checking out the presentation later in the very near future. So